1989 brought the first wide-release film dealing with the topic of AIDS, Longtime Companion. Longtime Companion focused on the life of a group of homosexual male friends and the inception of the news of AIDS in 1981 when the New York Times first reported on the incidence of the disease.
Rare cancer seen in 41 homosexuals.
The cause of the outbreak is unknown, and there is yet
No evidence of contagion.
While the production and distribution of this film seemed to mark a new age for Hollywood and served as a symbol of tolerance, audiences and especially activists of HIV and AIDS didn't agree with many representations of homosexual males and AIDS that the film visualized. Firstly, activists disagreed with the fact that the film promoted monogamy and abstinence instead of safe sex as preventative measures of contracting AIDS. Furthermore, by having the only single male in the film be the first to die of AIDS, these ideologies were promoted to a greater extent. While the issue of gay promiscuity was something that a mainstream film might have wanted to avoid, it was disappointing for some that the issue of safe sex was avoided altogether. Secondly, the film's representational politics didn't account for the diversity of the gay community and people with HIV, which was a big problem. The central characters of Longtime Companion are all white, middle or upper class gay men. Only one scene depicts a character of color, Alberto, to whom Willie is an AIDS buddy too. However, this is the only scene in which we meet and interact with Alberto, and his narrative does not in any way impact the progression of the movie or carry into the ensuing segments. Critics were also upset by the fact that the representation of only white homosexual men in the movie somehow valorized white gay men's lives over the lives of racial minorities, intravenous drug users, and women with HIV. Another big argument made about the film was that the characters themselves seemed to play into the dichotomy of innocent versus deserving individuals that contracted AIDS, which was being expressed in the media.
One thing I've noticed, it seems like a lot of people who are getting sick, they seem like a particular mindset or something.
self-destructive.
You know? A lot of drugs, a lot of sex. I'm not putting down drugs or sex, which play such an integral part in my life, but I just don't think you can abuse a body for that long without paying some price.
The religious right, which continued to grow in strength throughout this period, constantly equated AIDS with divine retribution for the sin of homosexuality, and the visual representation of it on film was grossly insensitive. Critics believed that having people from the homosexual community allude to the fact that illicit behavior was punishable by AIDS was not only inconsiderate, but could tear apart a community that was already being scrutinized by other forms of media. In 1993, Philadelphia received backlash from audiences for many of the same reasons that Longtime Companion did. In the film, Tom Hanks plays Andy Beckett, a senior associate at the largest corporate firm in Philadelphia, who feels he is wrongfully terminated from his position because he is homosexual and has AIDS.
We feel it isn't fair to keep you here when your prospects are limited.
Many of the critiques of Philadelphia included the fact that, like Longtime Companion, this film was still unilateral in terms of representing the demographic of the people affected by AIDS. By 1993, when the film was released, AIDS had become a disease of the poor, heterosexual women of color, and drug users. Yet, Philadelphia was still depicting an upper-class white homosexual male. Questions asked during Beckett's trial alluded to the same ideas of the innocent versus deserving individuals who had AIDS, and the film again avoided the issue of sexual politics. Despite the similarity in critiques that existed between Longtime Companion and Philadelphia, one clear difference between the films was that Hollywood was no longer abiding to the conciliatory tones that AIDS movies typically had. Instead, Philadelphia was attacking the public's perception about AIDS and homosexuality headfirst through the character of Joe Miller, played by Denzel Washington.
If you were constantly thinking, I don't want this person to touch me,
I have a case.
I don't want them to even breathe on me.
You don't want it for personal reasons.
Thank you, that's correct, I don't.
That's very disappointing.
Joe Miller, a lawyer who is initially reluctant to represent Beckett but then agrees to it, personifies the homo and AIDS phobia that was sweeping the United States after the discovery of the disease. However problematic activists may have thought Miller's character to be, Hollywood executives hoped the attitudes of people would change after seeing a movie like Philadelphia and becoming more acquainted with the plight of homosexual men affected by AIDS, in the same way that Miller's attitudes changed after getting to know Beckett.
Most homophobic or prejudiced or whatever toward gays or toward anyone who has AIDS, they'll probably look at my character and say, yeah, that's right, good. That's right, he's saying what I want to say. Finally, we have our voice, you know. But I think the subtle changes that he makes as the film goes along, at least by the end of the film, it if they've stuck with him and they agree with him, then they have to be at least as different by the end of the film as he is, you know, or at least willing to maybe rethink their way.
Denzel Washington, along with the rest of Hollywood, had high hopes for films like Longtime Companion in Philadelphia. While the mere representation of AIDS in films was groundbreaking, it is also important to remember that accurate and more realistic representations of people with HIV and AIDS would have been more powerful and would have ignited a greater change in public perceptions. Moving forward in the film industry, it's crucial to look back at the vanguard of films that first made it possible for people infected with AIDS to have a voice in Hollywood, but also to consider ways to make these depictions more closely reflect the plight and lives of the people that are supposed to be illustrated.
And my clothes don't fit me no more.